There in the commodities section, I did a research on oil. And during my fundamental research modeling exercises, I found out this phenomena called peak oil, where the supply reaches a maximum, tapers off, and then goes into a terminal decline. So what my research showed me actually shook me. And then I went a little more into it, in more depth. I did more literature review, spoke to people. And then I found out that there are enough elements of truth in the fact that resources will peak. Not just oil, but other resources, because of geological reasons and because basically resources are finite. That's when I decided to make a shift towards studying the issues of limits to growth, sustainability, climate change, emissions. Because once you study energy, you also have to link it to emissions. And then I made a switch from stock markets to climate change adaptation as a work profile. Then I was involved in a project for 5 years in 63 villages in 3 different states, but I was located in Pune. So I worked for 5 years in a climate change adaptation project where I looked at local economics, how money enters the economy, leaves the economy. I did a report on peak oil, a manuscript on peak oil. That was my starting point. Then developed tools for how to build a localized project which can also factor in issues of climate change. Those are the kind of things that I did. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I would say the terminology of growth actually has been to an extent miscoined and misunderstood. Because overall, if you look at a system per se, even Earth as a system, it moves into oscillations. It does not have a unilateral or uniform trajectory. It does not necessarily double as exponential growth and goes into an infinite curve. That's not what happens. There are ages which keep coming and going, keep coming and going. So in a long temporal boundary, Earth also moves in a steady state in terms of climate cycles or whatever. We have just coined the term growth to mean that we have to necessarily grow continuously. That's where I have a disconnect. Maybe you can grow to a certain extent, and then you need to correct, and then you need to again grow, then you need to correct. So you need to move into a dynamic equilibrium, as I call it. So you grow, you degrow, you grow, you degrow, you grow, you degrow. The moment you grow and then you degrow, you allow nature time to regenerate itself for it to be useful to you, and not for consumptive or overconsumptive purposes. So somehow, if we can articulate this well enough to understand that growth is only one particular part of your overall steady state system, and then the system has to correct, to come down, give some space for the ecosystems to regenerate, and then be ready for meaningful consumption. I think that would be the ideal state of saying that we are progressing and not necessarily only growing. I think ancient sunshine. For a large part of time, human population couldn't cross 1 billion until very, very recently, until the 17th century, 18th century. The world population never crossed 1 billion. How did it move from 1 to 7 billion in a matter of 200 years is something which needs to be thought about. How did the world economy reach $60 trillion is something which you need to think about. How did the money flow in the economy reach $60 trillion is something we need to think about. So if you draw these hockey stick curves, they mimic each other, not only in their pattern, but also in the time frame. And along with that, if you draw the curve of carbon emissions, the killing curve over a large temporal boundary, they have also gone up. So I say we are living in times of exponential curves, and not only in the hockey stick curve, but we are reaching on the top. We are somewhere here, where it is now doubling. Times are shrinking. The population is doubling. The economy would double because we are in exponential growth. And I think ancient sunshine is the fuel which we used to harness and then grow. Otherwise, the nature's law, the nature's natural energy conversion rates never really allowed us to access such huge amount of energy in such short time. So basically, we have fast-forwarded timescales, and that was what has resulted into the growth. Just put it that way, that suddenly you have created extra labor force. If every one of us has 70 energy slaves working around the clock for us, we are going to build pyramids. And these big constructions that you see around our pyramids, The pyramid of Egypt took a lot of time to be made with great difficulty. It would not take that much amount of time now because we have got a surplus energy source. Maybe it has to do something with the education thing also. The kind of subjects included in the education system, and maybe the cross linkages drawn through the education system. A physicist is a physicist, a financial guy is a financial guy, an anthropologist is an anthropologist. I don't think so. I think these three sectors are very, very closely linked. They have an interdisciplinary cause and effect relationship, and their mutual interaction results into the outcome that we see around. So I think cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary education is something which needs to be done at a very early stage, because intuitively children are, I think, systems oriented. They have a ability to understand the interlinkages, their mind, intuitively. So if we involve those kind of paradigms in the education system very early stage, that could bring about a lot of changes. Well, I don't think so, because if you see the world reserves of gold and silver, if you have to monetize them and value it, I don't think it will exceed $10 trillion. And this I am speaking from a source which I read. But the global economy is $60 trillion GDP. If you include shadow derivatives, bonds, then people have given estimates of even it crossing $1,000 trillion. So at a base of $4 to $10 trillion of gold and silver, you have created a financial web of $1,500 trillion. So I mean, that's how it has grown. There is no particular tangible growth which you have, and also it is the fractional reserve banking which has led to broad money being created. And simply put, if everybody goes to the bank account to withdraw their money, we could have some problems. India, I still feel, has a comparative advantage, to be honest. We still have a lot of informal economy and non-monetized economy, which actually can build resilience. We need to be wise enough now to understand how to balance it. A poor is not a poor until he or she is rated as poor. If he or she has access to resources, person living in a healthy ecosystem, I think, is a well-to-do person. So you need to balance the two paradigms. Indian villages and barter economies thrived in the earlier times. Now with the advent of fiat currency and paper currency, the economics are changing, but with that the ecosystem is also degrading. So the quality of life could be at risk. So I think India is going in that direction, where we are moving towards a monetized economy, where we are moving towards a growth economy. We have already moved towards a growth economy. We are seen as one of the fastest growing nations, but we still have huge amounts of fiscal deficits. And those deficits mainly come from the trade deficits because of energy imports. We have huge amount of energy imports which contribute to the fiscal deficit. Once you have fiscal deficit, you got to do deficit financing. You print more currency, your currencies would become weaker. So I don't know how to come out of this cycle until we have an energy-based approach also, along with many other issues. That's the question that I also struggle with and live with every day. We have a 85% or 80% plus oil import economy, which is massive. It wouldn't be long when India also becomes a coal importing. It has already become a coal importing economy, but in big terms, big quantities. So we need to really have an energy vision for the country, and maybe need to come up with energy budgets which determine the quality of life that a person or a family should have. If you have those kind of energy budgets which are not exploitative in nature or which are not rooted in growth paradigms, then maybe you can rationalize the energy requirements of the country. But I really don't have an answer with 1.4 billion people how we are going to manage cheap supply of energy for a long time. It gets reported sectorally in the communication lines, be it newspaper, articles, publishing, or even subjects. So somebody would read about water crisis and would become a water expert, would do water related work. Somebody would read an energy crisis and would become an energy expert. So people do talk about it, that we are facing these kind of crises, but we still don't understand their interplay and what kind of effect they can have cumulatively or together, because they mutually interact. And with their mutual interaction, the system's vulnerability can go up or come down. So it's the cross-cutting linkages which is the leverage point, which can make the system collapse or steady. Very much. It is very important to see the interplays, interlinkages, and how each other are interdependent, interconnected, interrelated, and their mutual interaction actually uh, gives the future pathway of an economy, of an environment, of the well-being of the people. Well, yes, I think, and that's the ultimate question in my mind also. How do we make a 5-year plan with these kind of challenges? Does these kind of challenges are taken into consideration while making a plan? If they are taken into consideration, can we make a plan for it? That's the question. If we can't make a plan, then what would happen is the question. And can we proactively prepare for it or take proactive measures to lessen the consequences, be it good, bad, or whatever? So, coming from a systems perspective, I say if a system has gone into overshoot, what follows an overshoot in a theoretical construct is a collapse. But in practical sense, I think because markets keep correcting itself, so we may see one collapse which happened in 2007-8, where the oil prices went to $147 a barrel, and subprime crisis happened, and it triggered a massive collapse. That's one way of correction. Now the system has again started growing. I think more such collapses can come, and each collapse will keep getting deeper and deeper till the system gives up. So we could very well be in a anticipatory collapse mode and not a theoretical smooth collapse curve. That's how I see it. If we can understand this as a theory, then we can put a lot of data and practical patterns that we see around in the world and see if we are on that trajectory. If we are, then we need to proactively prepare for a oscillatory turbulence in the Indian economy with respect to energy, environment, water, or whatever. Absolutely, absolutely. And these two are very much interlinked because globalization and the incentives that money gives to people does not really enable a environment friendly lifestyle. If you have more money, you can only spend it on carbon heavy items. If the purpose of money or if the incentive of people changes, then I think people's behavior would change. You can incentivize a sustainable behavior, not by subsidizing but incentivizing. And that's the role of economics, I believe. Coming back to the question of only financial collapse, what about the climate collapse? If you rely on models, climate models, and I say all models are wrong, they're only partially correct. It seems that we are headed for a 2 degree centigrade rise globally. This does not mean that all parts of the world will grow by 2 degrees centigrade. Some can warm even more than 5 degrees centigrade, or say 6 degrees centigrade. But the global average would come out as 2 degrees centigrade. So a lot of countries would be vulnerable to different kinds of risks. In that context, I would agree that we are also facing a climate risk or climate change impact. Well, when I did this kind of research, I found out that I'm sitting on the top of the pyramid, which is a pyramid made on a very weak base, if I may say. And I thought that I'm at a very high risk. So it was more of a personal choice. So issues of peak oil, climate change, and resource depletion are more personal to me, as much as they may be universal to the world. And in that light, I made the shift to find solutions to the problems that we will face, I will face in my lifetime, or my child would face in his or her lifetime. In that light, I made the change. And if the skill sets of all of us, we all are gifted with unique skill sets, if they can be used to work towards a more sustainable living by highlighting these challenges first and then designing responses to it, I think that's where that's our biggest opportunity. That's true, but I still believe that we are a network of people and systems. And I think in network systems, small changes in different groups or subgroups, if they start happening and if they come together, it can influence the bigger system. But if you start top down, I'm not very convinced how soon or how much impact or how much change we can influence. Very difficult, because we are in the system. We have to influence a change at the top of the system. Very difficult. So I would rather put my bet on small movements happening in different places and how they get connected as the crisis unfolds. That's not true. It's much more than switching off your lights and bulbs. It's much more than that. Yes, I have tried. It worked, and also it did not work. I found a good life partner because of that, which I'm grateful to. And I also have taught in B school in Pune, the subject of systems thinking, where we used climate change, sustainability, peak oil as one of the themes. It did come across well. Some of my students joined the project, we worked together, and so I think if we try to communicate in an unbiased language, in a little scientific language, I think it can make a difference. I don't want to paint a very negative picture. But well, if you're not proactive enough to plan, then we could see some financial and social disasters. If money valuations, rupee valuations go haywire, purchasing power dips, then there could be a lot of social turbulence in the country, which would be very difficult to handle in terms of governance. That's one thing that I feel. Second is food, the food production, which is now also being mainly fueled by fossil fuels and oil, because you got to transport it, you got to make fertilizers and other things. That will take a hit. If that happens, then it is not only an economic collapse but also a food-based collapse and a social turmoil, which could become very, very, very complex and difficult to manage. It will push us towards, from complexity, it will push us towards chaos. So chaos is my answer for that kind of a thing. I cannot narrate how it would happen, what would happen, but I think it would become fairly chaotic and miserable. I think it will just we'll just be having a lot of pain in this transition. That's my real worry. A correction happens in nature also, in economics also. So if there's a overshoot, there is a collapse. That's fine. But the pain that we will go through in this correction would be far more if we are not proactive to design a correction in the growth and to manage the transformation. If we don't do that, then the pain could be much, much more.
But do you find anybody anywhere, apart from this kind of symposiums, talking about this in the mainstream? Media, planners, administrators?
Well, no, not in the mainstream, not in the open, not really. I don't read it in newspapers, or I don't see it on television. But in the international circuit or the economics of happiness group that we were part of, people do talk about localization and steady state economics written by Herman Daly. The Society of System Dynamics has done some work on this. The Balloton Group and Donella Meadows Institute, they have been talking about it. But those are in the academic circles. Acceptance of an academic theory into a mainstream is not yet there. You have to test those academic theories as soon as possible and have examples of change. Have a proof of concept saying that here is a mass of people living on these principles and they're happy. Once you've established a pilot, a prototype, working prototype, then it might start attracting people, or it might start pulling the big system. So you need to create a subsystem which is more attractive than the big system and hope that when the crisis comes, people will start adopting it.
But we already had a subsystem.
Where?
The smaller villages, the Adivasis.
Yes, exactly, and that's why we have to continue working there. That's another reason why I still feel little biased towards the rural economy and villages, because there lies our highest probability of success in terms of creating an impact in a short time. If you got to redesign cities, it will take much more time than redesigning villages, which are already partially designed for sustainability because they are still embedded in ecosystems. They are not embedded in artificial constructed ecosystems, urban ecosystems. So आपको गांव में ज़्यादा काम करना चाहिए to make a model. You smart cities बनाना चाह रहे, if you can make smart villages or transition towns, I think there lies our leverage to create examples of change. Till we don't have examples, all that I'm saying will remain a theory and not many people would watch it.
Would you say growth is a disease?
Well, I think human beings are a disease to the planet. It's like the cancer cell, which has just grown way too much. But I mean, that's a very negative way of saying. But that's what has happened. We have grown from 1 billion to 7 billion. No other species has grown so much in such a short time. We are one of the species in the web of life. If you have grown too much, then maybe we are doing harm to ourselves. We're expediting our own demise. That could be one of the outcomes of growth paradigm or our obsession with growth. We're too smart for our own good.
We're smart, but we're not wise.
We're not wise. And wisdom cannot be taught. You have to experience and become wise. And that's why some of the earlier generations in our traditional system who lived in harmony with nature had an had a unique sense of wisdom, which was very difficult to articulate in modern language or in terms of matrix or in terms of modeling exercises. But they knew what was going on.
So, the same way, I'd like to ask you, limits is a bad word. You don't respect limits. Whereas growth is a good word. Whenever you talk about limits in anything, you know, whereas limits is more intrinsic to nature and health. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there are limits to everything. Let me put it that way. Nothing can grow forever. Because if something grows forever, then it will consume the entire universe, which is not true, which cannot happen. So limits actually is in your interest, I would say. Those are your boundaries. If you cross those boundaries, you put yourself at risk. And that's why it's important that you maintain or live within the limits of growth. And those limits of growth can be of health, not health, of resources. Yes, that study was done in 1971. Club of Rome called up the system dynamics modeling team and said, make a model for the world. They made a World 3 model, and Donella Meadows wrote a book on it called Limits to Growth, explaining how 5 critical sectors would move around and the structures. It was debunked because it was written in 1971 when we were growing, when we had found cheap oil in the early 1960s. It was debunked, and then the critique for limits of growth also came. But I personally still believe in that limits to growth philosophy and what the models said. But yes, it did not catch fancy of the mainstream, and I don't think it has caught fancy of the mainstream even now. The whole term of green growth also has an element of infinite growth hidden in it, which does not come out explicitly, which needs to come out explicitly, if at all it is hidden. That's a paradox. That's a paradox. Absolutely paradox. That drives me nuts. You're trying to sustain the growth. Absolutely. Absolutely. You just paint it green and then we say we are sustaining our growth. Even if you read the annual reports of most of the oil and gas companies, they are coming out in green color. That's their contribution. So, I mean, it's good for a start, but that's not the end, I would say. I would say explore and not exploit, because exploit word comes out with a sense of arrogance, saying that you have the right to exploit. So I don't believe in that, it being the right word. I would say explore and meaningfully use. Exploitation basically it comes out as is the base for growing, which cannot be accepted, I believe. Maybe they mean use, but exploitation gives them an arrogant right on it. It also talks about the paradigm from where they are coming when they use the word exploit.